Hello! Alright, it's time. I finished another book. But this book is different because this book is real life. Right now we're gonna get into my review. We're just gonna get into the nitty-gritty about the book Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Dr. Lindsay C. Gibson. She is a doctor in psychology. Here is Miss Gibson, Dr. Gibson. If I could say one thing to make you understand the magnitude of impact that this book had on me, it would be the question, why does Dr. Gibson not have a Nobel Peace Prize? A science, psychology, you're the best ever prize, something huge. This book has the knowledge, the research to change the world, and that's not an exaggeration in the least. If you have read this book and you're watching this review to see where I'm coming from, you know how good this book is. If you have not read this book, by the end of this video, I hope to have convinced you to read this book. I finished it yesterday. I'm 22 years old, and that's for my history log, okay? This book has given me such an incredible leg up on life, on relationships. If you have this weird, tense feeling around the adults that raised you, but nothing has ever been done physically to you, and there has never been any direct harm to you, you most likely grew up with emotionally immature parents. I grew up with so much internal turmoil. It was confusing where it was coming from because I didn't grow up with a radically horrible, terrible nightmare childhood. And although there are a couple things I could pinpoint that, I could say, okay, yeah, that messed me up, there was never any direct physical harm to me. As people say, there's always someone who has it worse. I'm not one to complain. So, with that being said, I tried to read this book in 2020. I felt a pull to it. I'm very analytical. I like to understand why things are the way that they are. So I picked this book up, had a panic attack on chapter 2. Now, that was around the time I was starting therapy. I was not ready. My wounds were still very fresh and throbbing with pain. So since 2020, I've gone through therapy, the majority of it, healed a tremendous amount. So I decided to pick this book up again because the 2 chapters that I read rocked my shit. I picked this book up a month ago. It did take me a little bit longer than I expected to read and finish it, but that was because I was being very intentional with understanding every point the author was trying to make. I didn't want to skim through it. I wanted to grip whatever was in this book. I highlighted and I annotated a lot of underlining in this book, and I will be recommending it to anyone that is even a little bit intrigued of the psychological workings of a family or any relationship, really. I spent a lot of my childhood analyzing the adults in my life, trying to understand why they were doing that, why they weren't doing that, why I felt this way, why I didn't feel that way. And this book shed a big light on why I was asking all those questions. Now, before we get into this book and I start explaining a little bit about what you can find in this book, I do want to preface this video, this book review, is in no way a jab to my parents at all. I feel very fortunate to have grown up the way I did with the family that I did. However, it wasn't ideal. And as an internalizer, which is something you can find out about in this book, I have always registered emotional hurt in a way that was very hard to heal from. So this book starts off by explaining what an emotionally immature adult is. It goes into detail about their characteristics, and it also explains why they are the way that they are. And that's one thing I really value about this book, is that it doesn't just explain the personality type that they're talking about. It explains what has led them to be that type of person as well. I'm not one to only ask what, I'm more interested in the why usually, so I really valued that in this book it explained how people ended up being the way that they are, or what in their past has forced them into that personality type. So a quick rundown of the chapters in this book. Chapter 1. How emotionally immature parents affect their children's lives. Chapter 2, recognizing the emotionally immature parent. This chapter goes into detail about characteristics. And I read this part of the book realizing that a lot of adults in my life have a lot of these characteristics. So it was eye-opening. Something to also keep in mind, and this book does go into it, there is a spectrum to every characteristic that an emotionally immature adult has or can have. So let's say, for example, saying an emotionally immature adult is controlled by their emotions and swings from one extreme to the next. That, on one end of the spectrum, the extremity of it, obviously there are people that have that, but there's also a little bit more of a mild version to that as well. So with every characteristic in this book, every personality type, every defect, every immature tendency, It's all on a spectrum. You have to remember that when reading this book. Chapter 3 is how it feels to have a relationship with an emotionally immature parent. Chapter 4, 4 types of emotionally immature parents. Chapter 5 is how different children react to emotionally immature parenting. This chapter goes into what type of child comes out of that family unit with an emotionally immature parent or two, and that explains to you the externalizer and the internalizer. Now, chapter 6 is what it's like to be an internalizer. Internalizers are the ones who would most likely be picking up this book for help or guidance. An externalizer won't really, so that's why there is a sole chapter on being an internalizer. It's also a little bit more of a complex personality and internal wiring situation, so there's not a chapter on externalizers, but the book does talk about what externalizers turn into and the type of people that they end up being later on in life. Chapter 7 is breaking down and awakening. At this point, the book's taking a turn from explaining and teaching you all these things to helping you with tools on how to move forward in life, how to heal, how to pick up new tactics with the emotionally immature parents or adults in your life. Chapter 8 is how to avoid getting hooked by an emotionally immature parent. Chapter 9, how it feels to live free of rules and fantasies. Chapter 9 does go into the subconscious thoughts that we have as children and adopt into our lives when we have emotionally immature parents. So that's what rules and fantasies are. I'm not going to go into detail about that right now, but the book does explain it effectively. And chapter 10, how to identify emotionally mature people. Chapter 10 is a nice bow on top because it explained the type of people that you do want to be looking for. It was insightful to see all the characteristics that make up a mature person. I think one of the biggest things I felt reading this book was that the author seemed to be on your side. Dr. Gibson was on the side of mending whatever type of relationship you can have with your emotionally immature parent, and that was shocking to me because I was expecting a very cold, clinical, scientific book. This book was not written to jab at your childhood or at your parents. It really felt as though the author was wanting to serve you this knowledge in order for you to protect your heart. So many times in this book, things were said like, remember, you're not trying to be malicious towards your parents, but it is very important to see things from a logical standpoint. Things like, it does not make you a traitor to have your own feelings and thoughts. I feel it's important to say those kind of things when dealing with somebody who is looking for knowledge but not looking to resent. And that was the case with me. I was looking for something to help me mend relationships and fix problems without adding fuel to my fire, you know? This book also has exercises in it, so it'll have checklists that you can write in to determine if your parent or one of your parents is emotionally immature. Towards the end, it also has a checklist where you check off what you need to work on and fix in your life so that you're not expending emotional energy that you don't have. That was pretty cool. It's like a little bit more workbook-like, hands-on. So obviously this book isn't something you should read if your wounds are still open and raw. I learned that the hard way. However, this book helped me come to a full circle conclusion about what my childhood was like in general. A lot of times I feel like when I looked back on my childhood before this book, it all seemed a little bit blurry because you get stuck in the mix of your emotions, so many memories, so many bad things, so many good things. You don't know where to pinpoint where your turmoil comes from. So this book helped me kind of clear a little bit of the haze and see where little Oriana was in all of that. It's also crazy reading this book how many things are stored away in our brains from childhood that affect us on the daily subconsciously, like completely subconsciously. Sometimes we are the way that we are due to very specific things and we're so blind to it. Like we will never realize it because it's all subconscious. Another thing I really liked about this book is that it had real world examples and stories in it. Because Dr. Gibson is a doctor in psychology, she has a lot of hands-on real world experience with clients. With every chapter in this book, there's about 2 or 3 real client stories, which makes the science in this book a little bit more explainable in terms of real life. I like stories, so I really enjoyed reading about other people's experiences and stories about their parents, how they healed, how they mended relationships. It was nice to see the science I was reading about in this book applied in real life. So here's 3 of the biggest things that stood out to me in this book. Okay? 1, emotional labor. There was a section in this book, it explained what emotional labor was. That slapped me in the face and curb stomped me into the ground. It made me realize how much emotional labor I'm doing for everyone around me 24/7. It was a hard pill to swallow, I'm not gonna lie. In understanding what it is, catching myself on the daily doing it, actively doing it, I was like constantly confused with myself. I'm like, girl, relax. All right, you don't have to be doing this for that random person right now. You don't have to be observing their micro expressions to see how they're feeling so you can pacify them right now, you know? So that was something that stuck with me. Another thing that stuck with me was the explanation of the 2 types of children that come from a family with emotionally immature parents, the externalizer and the internalizer. Now, I am the textbook definition of an internalizer. As an internalizer, you look for solutions within yourself and you're always trying to solve the problems around you by yourself. You don't really ask for help and you log everything in your dome for dissecting and assessing later on. An externalizer is someone who blames everyone else around them for their problems and expects external help for everything that they need help with. The book goes on to explain that externalizers are actually the ones that end up being emotionally immature adults later on in life because they don't take accountability for their actions, the way that they feel, the things that they do. So that shed a lot of light into my life and the people around me. The third thing that really stuck with me was the end of the book, where it went into how you can have a connection and relationship with your emotionally immature parent without expecting emotional fulfillment. That was not something I ever thought to seek, but it's something that is most likely going to be more fulfilling for both the child and the parent. So that was really interesting for me to read and almost a little bit difficult to come to terms with, if I'm honest, but I'm still processing it. Okay, I finished the book yesterday. I'm still processing that. So it did go into detail about how adults with emotionally immature parents can guard their heart and their energy from a like soul-sucking relationship. All in all, this is one of the best books I've ever read, one of the most impactful books I've ever read. I feel as though if every person on this earth was forced to read and understand this book, society would be serene and perfect and flawless. Originally, I planned on taking notes and kind of giving a version of a Spark Notes book review about this book, but I could take notes for days and I feel as though I would not be doing this book any justice. I also feel like it's pretty compact within itself. It's thin and the text isn't micro. It's perfectly written in its entirety. It's endlessly insightful. I like that the author's voice is very prominent in this book and it doesn't feel like a textbook or a clinical study. It feels warm and it feels like you're talking to somebody who cares about you, who cares about the relationships you have in your family, who cares about you healing. So I appreciated that so much. I really did. I feel so lucky to have stumbled upon this book and I feel so sad for anyone who has left the face of this earth without being able to consume this study. It's a shame that it's not required reading in college, or maybe it is. I hope it is. This is insane. This book has not only changed my life, well, it did change my life. It changed my life because it changed the way I think, it changed the way that I analyze, it changed the way that I observe, it changed the way that I react emotionally to things and people that are not emotionally well or mature. I think if anyone is ever having issues, I'm like, here. I don't know, it feels like a prank. I'm like, so let me read you the back of this book and you come to your own conclusion on if you're curious enough to change your life. Was your parent difficult, immature, or emotionally unavailable? If you grew up with an emotionally immature, unavailable, or selfish parent, you may have lingering feelings of anger, loneliness, betrayal, or abandonment. You may recall your childhood as a time when your emotional needs were not met, when your feelings were dismissed, or when you took on adult levels of responsibility in an effort to compensate for your parents' behavior. These wounds can be healed and you can move forward in your life. In this breakthrough book, clinical psychologist Lindsay Gibson exposes the destructive nature of parents who are emotionally immature or unavailable. You will see how these parents create a sense of neglect and discover ways to heal from the pain and confusion caused by your childhood. By freeing yourself from your parents' emotionally immaturity, you can recover your true nature, control how you react to them, and avoid disappointment. Finally, you'll be able to learn how to create positive, new relationships so you can build a better life. Can you ask for more? No, you can't ask for more. The part where it says that you had to take on adult levels of responsibility in an effort to compensate for your parents' behavior? Hello? I feel like that's 90% of us. Am I rude in saying that? Me and all my friends, you know? This book is holy grail. Again, I'm 22 and I feel at a crazy advantage because I finished this book, because I read this book, because I have gone to therapy. I'm just very happy. I feel very thankful. So I'll leave you with this. One of the last pages in this book has such a warm goodbye, so I'll read you this. Understanding your past and embarking on a new future can be a bittersweet process. Shining a light on what happens to you and how it affected your choices can stir up sadness about what you've lost or never had. That's the way light is. It shines on everything, not just the things we want to see. There's no reason you can't have a happy life starting now. I actually think it can feel more rewarding to give yourself a happy life now as an aware adult than to have always had it from the beginning. To be aware and present at the birth of your new self as an adult is pretty incredible stuff. How many people get to be awake and aware for the emergence of the person they were always meant to be? How many people get to have 2 lifetimes in one? So tell me, is it worth the pain to get to live twice in one life? Are you glad to have chosen the path of awareness? Yes? Me too.